Greetings, folks. Brian Benz here, Cloud Advocate at Microsoft, welcoming you to a JDConf 2024 on-demand session. Brian Spendolini, who's a product manager for Azure SQL Database, is going to show you how to create a change data stream with Java, Azure SQL, and Functions. It's a great way to validate or augment data as you're getting into your data stores, and there's other use cases as well. Brian will cover all that as well as a demo. Check it out.
Hello and welcome to the 2024 Microsoft Java Developers Conference. I'm Brian Spendolini, a product manager in the Azure SQL Database team. This lightning talk is going to go over how quickly you can create a change data stream with Java, Azure SQL, and Azure Functions. Our task is simple. How can I leverage the change tracking features of the Azure SQL Database to expose data changes using an outgoing change stream with little or no custom code and no scheduler features? Also, I don't want to write a lot of code. In fact, I don't want to write any code at all. Before we get into this no-code task, let's quickly review the main components here. First is the Azure SQL Database. The Azure SQL Database is a fully managed platform-as-a-service database engine that handles most of the database management functions such as upgrading, patching, backups, and monitoring without user involvement. Azure Functions is an event-driven, compute-on-demand experience that extends existing Azure application platform with capabilities to implement code triggered by events occurring in just about any Azure service, as well as on-premise systems. Even better, choose the programming language that you are most comfortable with: Java, C#, JavaScript, Python, or even PowerShell. With Azure Functions, we will be using the Azure SQL bindings. There are three types of SQL bindings: input, output, and trigger. The Azure SQL input binding retrieves data from a database and passes it to the input parameter of an Azure function. The Azure SQL output binding lets you take in data via a function and write it to the database. The Azure SQL trigger uses change tracking functionality to monitor a SQL table for changes and triggers a function when a row is created, updated, or deleted. This data can then be passed to another function, an event hub, or even another database. Here are some use cases for Azure SQL bindings. Use SQL bindings for data enrichment by linking your data to Azure OpenAI for content safety or text moderation. Perform reverse geocode using Azure Functions and address data from the database, or call a REST GraphQL service from a function with data from your Azure SQL database. Send data to Stream Analytics for further investigation or fraud detection, and SQL bindings can start complex processing and return the data to be inserted into the database. Or trigger a web page or report to update and even have your database participate in event-based architectures. All right, it's time for the demo. You can see here the architecture that we want to create, and we're going to create this architecture right within a GitHub code space. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a database right within that code space using Docker and Docker. We're going to have a full SQL Server instance to use for development. Next, after we install a few objects into that database, we're going to create that SQL trigger in Java. We're going to use the Azure Function extension, and with a few button clicks, have a full function with that SQL trigger done and ready to be tested. You're going to see us test it as well, and we're going to test it by inserting data into that local database. Once we insert data into that database, you'll see the trigger fire, and on the bottom of the page, the output in the VS Code terminal. You'll see an insert, and you'll see an update, and you'll see it grab all the information from those rows. Our demo starts by using SQL CMD to create a local instance of MS SQL right here in our code space. We're actually using Docker and Docker to create it. And once the database created, we can use SQL CMD config connection string to get the connection string information for this database. This is going to consist of the server name, the username, and the password for that user. And we can copy and paste this connect string directly into our local.setting.json file. This is going to be used by the trigger to contact the database within the function. Once our database is up and running and all the objects have been created in it, we can start building the trigger. We can press F1 in CodeSpace and choose Azure Functions, Create Function. Next, we can do a search for SQL, and there it is, SQL Trigger. We can select that to get started. And we're going to use the default package name and the default function name for this demo. Here we are going to change this from table 1 to the to-do table. It's a table we pre-created that we're going to put the trigger function on. And lastly, we're going to select the SQL connect string. That is the variable that we have in our local settings JSON file that we just set with that connection string for the database. And here's the code that it generated for us. We can just hit F5 to start running this and try the code out directly from here. As you saw, we didn't have to write a single line of code to create this file. And we see that our local function is running. So we can come over here to our local database. And what we're going to do is we're going to do an insert. And what you'll see on the bottom in the terminal is the output from the trigger. So we see that we inserted that row, and we see operation 0, which is a insert statement. And we also see the data from that insert, including the columns and the values of those columns. In the next part of this demo, we're going to grab this ID that was created from the database, and we're going to put it in our update statement up here and run that, and then we'll see what the trigger does. And we see, just as before, we see the trigger run. Our operation, instead of a 0, our operation is now a 1, which is an update. And then again, as before, we see the columns and the values within those columns, including our new URL that we passed in via the update statement. And to quickly sum all this up, we see that we can easily and quickly create a change data stream with Azure Functions with little to no coding. SQL bindings are available in all of your favorite languages: Java, C#, JavaScript, Python, and PowerShell. There are 3 bindings available: the input for querying data, the output for inserting data, and the trigger. And local to cloud development is extremely easy. If you'd like to start, you can go to aka.ms/SQL bindings to learn more. And with that, thank you very much for watching today.
Thanks for watching. Check out this and more at jdconf.com.